people buy on trust,
Mhm.
not price, not anything else. Because today you're more apt to lose your job if you bring in a garbage piece of software than you are if just did an average job. So trust is critical, and that's number one.
Welcome to Ready Set Exec, the podcast where we sit down with executives across North America to unpack their business, leadership, and expertise.
And every other week, join us for Market Watch, all things hiring, real insights and no fluff. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Jim Carlough, transformational executive and leadership identity architect with more than 30 years of experience driving growth across healthcare and technology sectors. As chief sales officer at Impulse, he leads AI-powered engagement strategies, delivering over 1 billion healthcare conversations annually while accelerating double-digit ARR growth. A former president of Health Trio by Impulse, Jim is known for revitalizing organizations, scaling revenue exponentially, and building high-performance leadership cultures. It's good to have you on, Jim.
John, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, appreciate it. So I think one of the biggest things when you first look at some of the work you've done, really scaling healthcare and SaaS companies, and you tripled revenue at Health Trio, for example, in 3 years. So a big part of that, I think, is knowing your numbers, right? Knowing your KPIs and being a very metrics driven person, which I appreciate because I'm also a very metrics driven person. So one of the things I think you did was you improved your close ratios from 15% to, I'd say, nearly 70%. I'd love to know how that happened because that's a huge jump. And it can't just be bad people. There's also process, I think, involved in this, right?
There's a lot of process involved in it. And the first step was coming up with the KPIs we were going to measure. When I arrived at Health Trio in 2019, they didn't measure anything. In fact, if you asked them what the close ratio was, they weren't really sure. One salesperson told me it was 25%. And I didn't believe that because they had only sold one deal the year before. Having 3 salespeople and selling one deal that would tell me everybody's just sitting around.
Yeah.
So the reality was the close ratio was about 15%, if that. I'm giving them a little bit of credit on some of the stuff, but the pipeline was a mess. And there was stuff in the pipeline that was years old and needed to be cleansed out. So while we were implementing the KPIs and the very managed, disciplined sales process, we also did a serious cleansing operation within Salesforce and close things that should not have been left open, things that were dead years ago, just keeping them open to make it look like there was more of a pipeline than there was. And that had a big impact on the close ratio, because what happened was after you did the cleansing and you removed all the garbage, what was left was truly opportunity that was real.
Yeah.
And then zeroing in on that, it didn't look like we had all of this stuff we were chasing and, like running around the country with 150 prospects when in reality we had 20. And so that had a lot to do with it. But the KPIs, the reason the KPIs are important, a lot of organizations like to measure close ratio and quota attainment. The challenge with that is you got to measure it monthly, and most people don't. And so the KPIs allow you to see early warning signs of failure and people who are not going to make it. And it's especially good if you're bringing in new people, because if you have a disciplined process and it starts with, building a pipeline, you're going to see that in the activity. And if the activity is not there, then you're going to not see the pipeline generated. Then you also can see is what I call the hills and valleys of sales. People work hard on their pipeline and the pipeline gets hard and they start to get a bigger pipeline, and then they get a live one like live fish on the rod, and they focus all their energy on that. So what happens is the pipeline then, the results next month go down because they didn't focus on the rest of their pipeline. And at the same time, they have to keep the outbound activity up as well, because if they don't, they're not going to catch up. I'll give you an example. During COVID, I had an employee a salesperson who wanted to go spend a month in South America to visit family. and I had internet access. And so I said, that was fine. You're going to work remotely. It's okay. It's COVID. Everyone's remote. Just you're in another country. Well, when he got there, he had very poor internet service. And so his outbound efforts were virtually zero for the month. That led him to having an uphill battle to get his activity back to where it was prior to going out on vacation for 4 weeks or going to South America for 4 weeks. And so in that scenario, when you take your foot off the pedal, you've really got to get a jet engine to get it restarted. And that's why it's important to have KPIs that measure everything within the sales process, everything from pre-selling all the way through the different sales stages so that you can see everything moving logically in a patterned way. And then you can track the outcome more successfully. And so I think that's what's made me more successful as a leader is knowing to manage the things that impact the close ratio so that I can impact those during the process and fill the gaps and holes.
Yeah, and just from, just to simplify it too, for those listening, and, those that are not aware of sort of sales pipelines, like when I look at sales pipelines, I look at sales velocity, meaning how fast a prospect is moving through the funnel, meaning for those that don't know, a sales funnel is just, big at the top, which is the world. Then we talk prospects, suspects, and so on, right? You want the sales velocity, meaning how fast are they going from someone that's just on the street to an actual customer? That is your velocity, your speed to acquire that customer, right? Then we're also talking the size of the pipeline. So think of a pipe of water going to your home. The bigger the pipeline, the more water. So it's the size of the pipe and then also the speed of the pipe. That's what we're looking at to generate revenue, right? So what kind of KPIs would you say are important for every growth stage company to be tracking? And and how do you measure them? Because I know Salesforce, and this is maybe a criticism against Salesforce, but we always, in the sales world, we've always talked about it as data force, where everybody's just typing in information all day. I know when I was using it, it was a pain in the ass because there's just so much data we had to put in to fill a form. And we found switching to a simpler system like Pipedrive or one of these others was easier because reps were, it's also just the usage rates, right? Like if it's easy to use and requires minimal input, you're more likely to use it. Like a spreadsheet, for example, people love using that because it's like, oh, just type in the phone number, name, and go have at it. You're not worried about, and this creates the garbage data you were talking about. Because I've seen this in Salesforce where we had a huge database at the company I went to. 90% of the data was garbage because it hadn't been updated, faulty data or missing data when they put it in because they were slacking. The reps were sloppy, let's say. And I can't blame them. It takes you so much time that they did, So what do you think we should be looking at, and what kind of KPIs?
So here's what I look at. Measure. So the pre-sales activity is basically the cold calling exercises. And we used what commonly is called as drip campaigns. So early on, the team was not familiar with drip campaigns and was hesitant to picking up the phone and trying to call people. So I eased them into it by saying, okay, over a 30-day period, I want you to pick 10 people that you haven't talked to in the last year. And those 10 people are going to go in this funnel of activity. And over the course of 30 days, there has to be 6 outreaches to them. They could be email, phone call, text messaging, LinkedIn, any mechanism that they wanted. And so we would measure that. And what we found during COVID, a couple of things. Number one, people didn't forward their office phone to their cell phone. And they used voicemail as a way not to engage with people. And so we had some initial results with our drip campaigns, but over time, those results dwindled and we realized we had to up our game. And so what we did is we eventually got to where the size of the drip campaign was 12 to 15 outreaches in 30 days. And that started to move the needle. By the second year of doing that, we were able to map that over 65% of our sales were made to people that were in a drip campaign in the prior 18 months but we never spoke to them. But when it came time for them to have a need for what we had to sell, they picked up the phone and called us and said, yes, I remember getting all that stuff from you guys. You're a pain in the neck, but what can you do to help me? Because I have a problem now. And so in that aspect of it, that's what we measure then. In terms of people in the process and in the pipeline, two things about the way I run a pipeline. I have something that we call early stage, things that are not yet qualified. People have a solution. They're maybe looking in a couple of years and we're just nurturing them along. Those I don't count as real live opportunities, but I want to track the nurturing of them. So people have a KPI for the size of their early stage pipeline and the number of accounts in that pipeline. We also have then the qualified pipeline that we measure, which is the stuff that we bet the ranch on. These are the things that are actually in process. People are qualified. They have a need. They have a budget. We know who the decision maker is, or if it's a team, who they all are. And as they move through that, we track, as you said, the velocity of moving from stage to stage. Now, in our sales process, it's typically 6 to 9 months of a sales process.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of activity that has to take place during that time. And if it's not taking place, you can see that through the results. You can see that with the call drips to the calls dropping to that account, or no interaction with that account in Salesforce. So we're measuring the interactions over time as well as a KPI, in addition to the size and volume of the pipeline against metrics that are set for each salesperson. Then we get into the closing aspect of it. And to me, when you're in contracting is when you know you've got the deal. It can fall apart, but it's less likely to fall apart when paper is being shared back and forth.
Yeah.
I've only had one time in my entire career where a customer was negotiating a contract with two competitive companies for the same services. Only one time. It's a lot of effort to do that. Why would you want to back up your legal department to do that? So we got very good at measuring all of those components. And as a result of that, we saw the results change. We went from selling pre-2019 1 to 2 health plans a year to selling over 10 a year. We had 1 year, 2021, we sold a new deal every month from January through September. We missed October, didn't sell anything. The chairman of the board called me and asked me what the hell was going on. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you sold something every month. Last month, you didn't sell a damn thing. What happened? And I said, we're busy. What do you want me to tell you? But we didn't have anything to close. But we're going to close 2 this month. He says, that's what I wanted to hear. But, he said, Jim, you've been like feeding me heroin, right? I'm now hooked that I'm going to get a deal every month and I don't get it. And, now I'm shaking. Anyway, but those are the things that I enjoy to measure, and I like to see it because I can then go to you and say, John, I think you're having trouble in this area. Your deals stall out at this stage. Let's talk about what you're doing at this stage in the sales process and how we might change that and how we might impact that so we don't have them dropping off at 60% or at 70%. And at the same time, we had to balance those numbers because we measured things based on our own outbound, but we also participated in RFPs. And some of which, as you know from being an industry person, if you write the RFP for the customer, you have a better chance of winning the RFP. We weren't writing a lot of RFPs for customers, but we were winning them, and we hadn't before. And it taught us a lesson in terms of how to answer the questions. And I don't mean lying and misrepresenting your product, but giving enough detail about your capabilities that somebody can easily say, yes, that's what I need. And historically, we were not doing that. We were answering it with yes or no and no explanation of what we actually deliver with that part of the solution. So all of those things put together really led to that success and the tripling of the revenue.
No, it makes sense. Breaking down the stages of a deal, knowing all your numbers and having data to show you sort of where there's opportunities for coaching with the team. right? And that kind of takes us to the next topic of, building a metrics driven culture, having all your KPIs and your numbers, but also, leading with empathy with your team and, being able to create alignment between your leaders and your team and then coaching the underperformers. We always said, I guess, in sales, you're going to have, 10, 20% that are just rock stars or naturally gifted. They're just the ones shooting up the numbers. But the bulk of the sales team is sort of those daily grinders, the onesies and twosies guys that are just consistent. They work hard. They're never going to be superstars, but they're the ones building the bulk of the revenue for the company, and you got to keep them happy. What do you do in terms of, hiring your A players, and what are you doing to build the culture with your sales teams?
So I'm going to use an old phrase that Mr. Ross Perot used to tell us when I worked at Perot Systems. He said, when it comes to hiring people, I only want you to hire winners. And if you can't find winners, find people who hate to lose. So I look for people who have a disciplined personality already. And by that, I mean extra credit goes to people who come out of the military or college athletes. Doesn't matter the sport.
Mhm.
They're disciplined. They're used to following direction. They're used to being measured. And they fit very well into a sales organization if they have that capacity to be a salesperson. And so, if somebody comes to me and, they were a basketball player for some college team, they'll get extra credit in an interview against somebody else who isn't in that same capacity. I'm also a stickler for during the interview process of making sure that I do two things. I interview everybody twice.
Okay.
I want to make sure they show up the same way both times, and that my impressions the first time are either the same, and if they're different, are they better different or worse different? And the second conversation we have, I ask them to bring me their activity reports and or their sales results reports for the prior 2 or 3 years. The Because what I don't want to hire is I don't want to hire what I call a retread. A retread is somebody who job hops every 2 to 3 years. Because a lot of companies don't measure the discipline, somebody can come into a company, be given a year to build a pipeline. Then somebody notices that John's pipeline isn't where it should be. So they start managing John. Next thing you know, it's 2 years before they've taken action on somebody that probably shouldn't have never been hired. And so I do a lot of digging into examples and behavioral questions and walking through what their numbers were and even getting as granular as, well, what did you sell this person? And what level? I never ask for names of companies and I never ask for names of people, but I'll say, what was the level of person that was a decision maker on this deal? And how did you get into them? And because I want to know what disciplined tasks they're bringing to the table when they join us. Because it's only if they're not used to that, it's going to be a difficult transition for them to walk into that. And even when Impulse purchased Help Trio, it was a challenge for a couple of the Impulse people who had never been held to a discipline standard. And now all of a sudden we're implementing some discipline. And so I made an agreement with them. If they were hitting their number, they could follow any sales process they wanted. If they weren't hitting their number, they were going to follow my process because my process was proven. And so when it came time for somebody, we had people who were making their number and I kept my promise and said, okay, look, you don't have to do all of this extra stuff that I'm asking for. You keep doing what you're doing. But the moment you don't hit your number, you have to pick up the discipline again. And it was fairly treated. It was only one person who ultimately decided to retire because he just didn't like the fact that he was being held accountable for activity that he didn't think he needed to do.
And I guess, having an approach where every salesperson is different and some people have different strengths, being able to leverage their strengths. Like, for example, some people are better at cold calling than others, while others, they're really good at in-person meetings and, knocking on doors, right? depending on the type of sales you're doing, being able to leverage their strengths. I know for myself, pre-booked meetings seem to be one of the most effective things for me, meaning like I have a very high close ratio when I get the meeting, but the cold outreach part is something I'm not the greatest at. I definitely could use some help with lead gen and so on, right? So self-awareness, I think, is important for everybody as a salesperson, because no one's good at everything, and some people are just natural farmers as opposed to those hunters that just love to generate new business and want a comp plan that works with that, right? So right person, right seat is what they say, in EOS, in terms of how you're structuring your team. So how do you identify those like those high performers, and what are you doing to give them a plan for retention, to keep them long term? Because the top performers also have options to leave, right?
The best performers will always have options to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, even the poor performers have options to leave as well, and depending on how they present themselves or whatever. But I make sure that the people who are reporting into me, that I have a rock solid relationship with them, even if there's a manager in between us. I want to make sure that I'm aware of what's going on so that I know where I can help as well. And you're right. If rep one loves doing cold calling, you can't load him up with doing everybody's cold calling.
Yeah.
Because my standard is, even if you have a lead gen department, 80% of your activity, 80% of your pipeline needs to be self-generated.
Yeah.
If you have somebody else responsible for generating your pipeline, you're basically sitting back and not doing anything until somebody generates a lead. Well, if you make the salesperson accountable for generating 80% of their pipeline, then they are the ones that are going to have to go out there and find the opportunities and develop the relationships. And it's those relationships then that'll pay off down the road. And sometimes you just step in at the right time where you give a call and somebody answers the phone and says, as a matter of fact, we were just talking about that solution the other day and the fact that we need to look at something different for the future. So your timing's perfect. But that's rare. It's rare that you just happen to hit it perfectly. Usually you're gonna get in and you're gonna meet somebody, and it's gonna be a series of nurturing steps before something actually becomes what I call qualified, where we know they have a need, we know we have a solution to fix that need, we know they have a budget, and we know who the decision maker is. I think where a lot of people struggle the most, I think there's two areas people struggle the most. The first is, today people buy on trust,
Mm-hmm.
not price, not anything else. Because today you're more apt to lose your job if you bring in a garbage piece of software than you are if you just did an average job. So trust is critical, and that's number one. I think the second piece that people struggle with a lot is knowing when to take action and knowing when to sit back and just listen. And I think that's an area where salespeople struggle. And it's always fun to watch a new person, because when they go out on a sales call, they want to just do a vomit drop of everything that they've learned in their 4 weeks of, onboarding about the products and services. And they don't think about, you don't need to have a 50-page slide deck. In fact, at Impulse, we had 3 slides, not including the cover slide, because I'm a firm believer that if you're selling technology, people want to see and touch the technology. They don't want to see screen prints in a PowerPoint. And I've worked for companies where they made great PowerPoint presentations, elaborate PowerPoint presentations. And for a 1-hour meeting, they'd create 60, 70 slides, which you can never get through in a 1-hour meeting.
Yeah.
And so, our slide deck in 2019, when I got there at Health Trio, was like 28 slides. And we basically went in with 3 slides and simplified it and basically said, look, we can go as far as you want. I can pull out 50 slides, but I think you'd rather play with the system. So why don't we spend our time there? So we're going to go over 3 slides very quickly, take us 5-6 minutes. The rest of the hour, we're going to spend in the product itself. And we learned that our competitors weren't doing that. Our competitors were actually doing PowerPoint,
Yeah.
and you can't sell by PowerPoint.
No, it makes sense. One of the things we always did in telecom sales was, put the phone in the customer's hand. So the same thing applies. Put it in their hand, let them play with it, let them see it, let them feel it and touch it. And you will feel a sense of ownership when you actually use the product. So I can agree with you on that one. And the other thing about, talking too much as a sales rep, well, the old adage, you have two ears and one mouth. Listen more than you talk. Let them talk. The more they talk, the more engaged they are, the more interest they're going to show. If you get a customer talking, you've got the sale. That's kind of what we used to say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is too, it's okay to have that awkward silence. To me, I tell salespeople, the first one to speak loses.
Yeah.
You know, the first one to speak, let it just, if somebody dropped a bomb out there, let it just linger and, and let it resonate or do whatever. And just don't think that you just have to be on the spot with an immediate response. It's okay to take a pause and think through what someone just said before you try to talk about how to solve it.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And, how big was the teams that you had? I mean, it definitely gets to a point where quality control, as you scale and grow, because I just saw here you went from about 40 million in P&L up to 100, right? So when you
Mhm.
double in size, obviously the sales teams and everything else are growing, and the company as well, and keeping quality control as you're growing is a big aspect of ensuring customer churn is low, retention's high, and so on. What did you do as you grew these companies with your success?
So it was very important for us to stay connected with the development teams. SaaS solutions, whether they're truly SaaS or partially SaaS and require some configuration and customization, it was very important for our development teams to understand what was in the pipeline and when we would expect to be closing it. And there were discussions in the early first couple of years I was there because they had not ever in their history had growth like we were having. And it was stressing the development organization because they couldn't keep up. And, so at one leadership meeting, one of the head of QA said, I'd like to get everybody's support. And we asked Jim's team to stop selling. And I looked at him and I looked at the CEO and I said, can I answer that question? And Dominic, the CEO, said, yeah, go ahead. I said, we're not going to stop selling. You know, we
Yeah.
we're not going back to the way it was, guys. We gotta keep growing this thing. And so we made sure that they knew what we wouldn't give them a just a printout from Salesforce of the pipeline. We gave them a subset of the pipeline that we said is the most likely to close. And it came to being that every time I told them these five are going to close, they closed. May not have been on the exact date that I thought,
Yeah.
but they closed. So I ended up getting a reputation for being highly accurate with being able to project the fact that we're going to close these five deals in this quarter or this half a year or whatever it is. But you can't get there without the data and the knowledge and being into the weeds and stuff.
But I guess being accurate in forecasting is important operationally, because then you can plan your hiring and planning your team size and being able to absorb the customers that are coming on and service them at a high level. That's key, right? When you're building your teams, like how are you approaching that sort of forecasting aspect?
So we got caught short initially
Yeah.
because we were experiencing something that they had never seen before, which was actual sales and repeatable sales. I mean, seeing us bringing in one a month or,
Mhm.
my first 6 months there, we brought in five deals. The year before they brought in one. The year before that they brought in zero. And so now they're seeing numbers and the numbers are increasing. And at first we were caught because the owner at the time of the company was a physician and he had other businesses as well. And he used the profits from Health Trio to fund the other businesses. And so we were somewhat strapped with our ability to just hire people. And so it wasn't even just in time hiring, it was after the fact hiring when we're already implementing and realizing we're way behind because we don't have enough people. But in the 3 years that we tripled the number of clients in the company and the revenue, we tripled in employee size as well. We had, on my arrival, about 60 employees. And then 3 years later, we were almost at 180.
Nice. And did you look at like the revenue per rep or revenue per employee as a way to, you know, I've heard numbers of, oh, they got, $500,000 per employee or something. There's a lot of different numbers kicking around in terms of how you forecast that for hiring. How did you go about setting like hiring targets and so on?
So it was a little bit easier in the Health Trio days. It became a little bit more complicated in the Impulse days because we had multiple product lines and multiple sales teams. And so that's getting consolidated as we speak. But outside of that, the Health Trio model had people focused on regions. The Impulse model had people focused on named accounts. And the challenge with that was you had people living in Boston servicing people in California. And you had people living in California servicing people in Boston.
Okay.
And that's not efficient. It's not efficient at all. And so, that's something that's being rectified as we speak. It's hard to acquire 5 companies in a 3-year period
Yeah.
and get them synthesized and all operating down the same common path. And so that's a big job.
So did you end up bringing on their salespeople from all these acquisitions, or that must have been a bit of a process of vetting these new additions. And then, in M&As, it usually becomes, heads got to roll, let's just say,
Yeah.
you know?
So in M&A and things that I've been involved in, I was historically always used to consolidating quickly was the Perot way. So we had in any M&A deal, our charter was we had to find 30% savings within 90 days. So before we even signed the deal, we had to have mapped out what we were consolidating. So in the first 30 days, data centers were consolidated.
Yeah.
In the first 30 days, IT was consolidated, finance was, and so we had a transition cookbook that we ran every M&A by. Some companies don't have that. And what they do is they make an acquisition. And I worked for a company, and it's not Impulse, where they would acquire a company, but would commit to the company that they're purchasing that no changes would be made. And it ended up causing them to be their costs going through the roof with multiple data centers, multiple IT directors, no synergies on anything. And it ultimately was the one thing that I think hurt them. And they ultimately were sold. They were publicly traded, but ultimately were sold to private equity.
Yeah, there's the whole idea of acquisition is to, create a more efficient company. It's more profitable, I guess, right?
Yep.
And grow that. And if you're unwilling to make the hard decisions, it can, not to say you can't do those hard decisions without, empathy and taking care of people at the same time. It's possible to do that. It's a struggle for a lot of companies as well. As you're getting these, let's say there's a consolidation of the sales department. How do you go about deciding who to keep and what not? Because there's all these new salespeople, let's say, that are coming in. Was that a challenge or?
It's only a challenge when you bring in a like company. So for example, Health Trio was a portal company that Impulse purchased. It didn't compete with any existing Impulse product. Then a year after they acquired us, they bought our number one competitor from a portal perspective, a company called Zapari, who was struggling financially. And so when we brought those sales teams together, we had more salespeople than we needed. And one person voluntarily took himself out and retired. Two people came over and were working. And then I took one of those two people and moved him over to the impulse side because the guy happened to have had a clinical background and was an RN. And so taking him from portals and putting him on the digital engagement side made a lot of sense because we're dealing with the clinical people at the health plans with all our digital engagement tools.
Yeah.
And so we try to find a home for everybody before we just say, goodbye, we don't need you. I think sales and account management, it's easier to do that because you can cross pollinate with
Yeah.
things when you have like similarities. It's different when you're acquiring a print and mail company and you don't have anybody that does print and mail in your organization other than letters or invoices going out from finance.
No, that makes sense. It's, again, as we said, right, the right person in the right seat, and where they're needed, where their skills are transferable. That's also just part of being a good leader, to use your resources that you have available, right? So now we're getting into a new section here with AI, and let's say a whole new world with AI, right? And obviously health tech is and healthcare is absorbing AI into it as ways to improve efficiencies and so on. Where do you see AI in healthcare, digital health? Where is that headed in the next 3 to 5 years? And, how do you see that affecting sort of the experience of customers as well?
I see it improving the relationship with the customer because I think the AI will enable us to find populations of people that need to be served faster. The greatest advantage of AI is it can think much faster than you and I can. And it can go find the data to find the pockets of people that we have to engage in their healthcare in order to get their costs to go down, which is the common thing. You keep them get them healthy, keep the costs going down, make sure they're maintained. That's where, you know, people who take blood pressure medication, they miss a refill. AI needs to tell us Jim missed his refill. And we're texting Jim, why didn't you get a refill? Jim says, well, I'm unemployed. I don't have money. I can't afford it. We find a way to make that happen because a bad thing's going to happen if Jim doesn't take his, let's say, blood pressure medication.
Yeah.
So the AI is going to help us identify those people much faster because it can go much faster through the data than a human can. One thing I will say is I don't believe AI is going to replace 50% of the workforce. You hear all of these crazy numbers of people talking that the work that we do today is going to be different. Well, number one, AI is not going to replace leadership.
Yeah.
It can't, right? Leadership is a people business. AI doesn't have integrity. AI doesn't know when to show compassion. AI doesn't know when to show empathy. So for that reason, management it won't change the structure of leadership. It'll empower leadership with more data points to be able to act on things. It will have an impact, I think, in some of the areas where people are business analysts and do data mining or other areas where we could probably do it with a little less staff
Yeah.
because of the power of AI. But again, that's not the largest population of employees in every company. So I think it's going to be different. I think it's going to be slower on the provider side, the clinical side of healthcare using AI. There are some companies out there now that use AI in terms of making decisions as to whether somebody should have their tonsils removed or not. But I think that's still a learning process. There's one company that does it with worldwide data. There's one company that does it with just data based in the US, and practices are different. So I think the clinical aspect of it will be a little bit slower and cautiously approached, but it doesn't mean it's not going to exist in a hospital because they can use AI on billing. They can use AI on receivables. They can use AI in procurement or what they call materials management in a hospital setting. So those areas are ripe to become more efficient with AI. But from an engagement standpoint, I think it's in the identification of the populations and how best to serve them that AI will be the lead on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I've heard a lot of good things too in the diagnostic space about AI being just better at diagnosing things based on, X-rays or CT scans and so on. It's just, I think they did a study about like finding cancer, and it was more accurate than a physician because it's able to know thousands and thousands of photos and sort of give better diagnosis that way. So I think, with AI in healthcare, it's definitely a big component in the future. People are always worried about job loss. I mean, I think that's the the sky is falling type thing, but that you know we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. I guess that's
I,
you know,
it's like any wave and major transitions. Like when personal computers came about, right? Everybody thought that the computer is going to make everybody unemployed because they're going to have a computer to do things at their desk. Well, that didn't happen, but everybody did get a computer at their desk. And I think we're in the same spot now. We've got a new type of technology we haven't had before. We have to learn how to use it and what it's best used for, and then optimize it to get the most out of it. And that's going to take time. That's gonna take time.
So, as an aside, what do you think about sort of this AI SDRs out there? Have you checked one of them out before? Have you tried them?
I have not tried them. I have had a lot of phone calls and emails in the last couple of weeks
Oh
from a
yeah,
lot of people claiming to have an SDR, an AI generative solution for lead gen.
yeah,
I will tell you I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical. I want a human talking to a human.
yeah. No, fair enough. I've tested some of them out. Um, we had done some trials of them and so on. I think the latency, so like there's a pause sometimes because there's some latency between all the systems that is noticeable. You can definitely throw them off with saying the wrong thing, and you give them an objection, and somehow they just keep talking. They don't
They're not
take.
programmed to handle the objection.
Yeah, I mean, you can create rebuttal cycles and so on with them, but if you say something that's off-putting or off topic, then they just will go right back to their script. They don't know nuance and sarcasm, right? It's not a human. So it's still ways away from replacing salespeople. And I think also just the uncanny way of you can tell it's not a real person. You can sort of suss it out. If you're on the phone with them for more than a minute or two, you can really start to see that. So, but they're trying. I think it may be something as a sales tool. And this is something I've heard from other sales leaders of bringing an AI coach in where it listens to all their phone calls, sees all their emails, and gives them real time feedback based on all their data, all their
Correct.
conversations in terms of, oh, you didn't do this or you didn't do this, or giving the sales leader then, if you have 50 reps, let's say, getting a report from each rep in terms of their interactions, where they struggled, what objections that they saw, and so on. Maybe a good coaching tool to help you understand what's going on with them, because otherwise you're having to shadow and listen in on their phone calls. But if you get a report that's already done that, that could be something that sales leaders could use going forward. I've seen some things about this, or doing role playing with an AI SDR, to overcome objections and so on.
Yeah, so we use AI to do that. We also use AI to take meeting minutes, and also AI will then feed those minutes into Salesforce so that the rep
Okay.
doesn't have to type it all out, because the rep never puts everything in that was discussed, but AI is. And that is important for leadership to see, in addition to the fact that outlining what was covered and what was not. We also use AI that takes those meeting minutes and gives out the assignments of who agreed to do what in the meeting minutes, and then also writes the follow-up note back to the customer and people from the customer site that were there with a summary of the meeting notes and who all was present, and who all agreed to do what. And that's working very well for us. Very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, there's a lot of integrations now with AI to our CRM systems and so on that I think are
Correct.
great. Anything to reduce admin time for the reps, right? More face time and less
Correct.
typing, right? Absolutely. So last thing, I did see that you are writing a book, and would love to hear sort of your thoughts of like why you wrote it, how you wrote it, what is it about? Give us the inside scoop here.
So about 2 years ago, I was looking at the future and saying, what am I going to do when I retire? Couldn't come up with something. Here's what I do know. I don't play golf.
Yeah.
So I'm not joining a country club. I enjoy to fish, but I'm not going to go fishing every day in the Texas heat. So I kept thinking, what am I going to do? Because if I come up with nothing, every day my wife is going to give me a list of things to do. And that's not going to work, right? Because her things will be pull weeds in the garden, and that's not brain stimulating for me.
Hmm.
It's just not. So I started thinking about all the people I mentored, and I decided that I'm going to try to mentor people at scale. So the first thing I did is I wanted to understand all of the characteristics of the people I mentored and what they were missing when they came to me. And then I took that list and narrowed it down to what I call the 6 essential pillars. And this is the book. It's been out for a year. It's doing very, very well. I was just on an interview this morning with a radio station in Los Angeles and talking about the pillars in the book and I how I look at leadership. And around the world, we have this habit where we have a phrase of people who become accidental leaders.
Yeah.
And what that means, and I'm sure you know, maybe some of your listeners may not, but when there's an opening, the typical company will go look at that department and take the best technical resource and anoint them and make them a manager or a leader. But they do not give them a roadmap to follow. They don't have a leadership training program at that corporation. And what ends up happening is manager, the person never ends up transitioning from being an individual contributor to being a leader. They don't feel empowered. They don't feel that they know what they're doing. And it reflects on the team. And what you end up seeing is within 18 months, people on the team becoming disgruntled and leaving, and the leader becoming burnt out. And so I want to be able to fix that at scale. We today in the US have an average attrition rate of 10 to 15%. My career average voluntary resignation level is below 5 attrition rate. So my attrition rate has always been low, and I've always managed the way that I do today. So I can say to a company, look, if you've got an attrition issue, you have a leadership issue, and I can cut that in half. It's going to take time, but I can cut that in half. And we do that by changing the identity of the leader or the manager to allow them to really step into that leadership role. And so the book is supporting what I've also now just created and launched this morning is a workshop for corporations, 3-day workshop. And I'm also offering to individuals the ability to join a cohort of peers that may be from multiple companies to take them through that same workshop, but over 8 or 9 weeks and doing it one night a week or one late afternoon a week. And in between doing exercises at home and coming back and doing role plays and things like that. So I'm rolling that out as we speak. And then the next step of this will be able to I'm thinking about taking that same material and doing a do-it-yourself version where somebody can just log in on the internet and take themselves through the program. The downside of that is they don't get the interaction with other people and they don't get the role playing capabilities.
Yeah.
And I think those are critical to it. So I don't know yet how I'm going to solve that part of it. But that's what I'm working on. And that's for the next phase of my life. And I plan to hopefully be pretty busy. I actually was on a call yesterday with a organization that wants me at 9 different locations before the end of this year.
Nice.
So
Well, keeping yourself busy and keeping mentally stimulated, I think is important, especially if you're thinking about retirement. Because if you're one of those people that are like type A, like you like to keep busy, you like to feel like you're doing useful work, it's hard to just stop one day and start, as you said, golfing or something. I know I couldn't do it. I plan on working until till I'm dead, right? So, but the amount of work we can taper down. We can reduce it to 20 hours a week, maybe 30 most, and enjoy, you know,
and enjoy the rest of the time doing
yeah.
something else. But yeah, I have to be doing something. And doing it with peers or with people would be my preference. And especially if I'm able to help them. And I think I'm able to help people at scale. And so I'm really excited about that. And at the same time, I'm doing some fractional CRO type work as well.
And when we talk about sales too, I think the methods of selling, I wouldn't say it's changed that much. People are the same. It's like building trust, building, showing them the product and integrity that you have behind it. People buy from people rather than buying from the product or whatnot. In most cases, right? Being able to share your experience, I think, is helpful because we're I think one of the issues now we're seeing is there's all these new automations in sales. There's all these toys. There's all these shiny balls out there. People are chasing to use. I get between AI SDRs, cloud automation. I've seen an explosion of things on the internet about this now. Drip campaigns that are automated and so on. There's just all these like impersonal tools that are being brought in. But really, I think, getting a person in front of another person to get a conversation is what's going to get you the sale, right?
I
And
agree.
knowing how to do that and being able to train that is something that it's almost like a lost art of going back to old school methods, you know.
Yeah. Totally agree with that because one of the things that I see salespeople struggle with is getting to the decision maker because they're not necessarily dealing with the C-suite. And so learning about how to get to the C-suite and how to appear at the C-suite so that you can interact at that level, I think is critical, especially for sales success. I can't talk today. Success.
No worries. Well, I appreciate your insights and looking forward to reading your book. So thank you for the copy there. I will be
It's
reading
in the
that
mail.
next few weeks here and posting about it. So if you haven't already, in the link we're gonna share a link for your Amazon page there so they can check it out. So definitely recommend, and we'll be in
Perfect.
touch.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.